Hey everybody, I'm Pete Grimm. I run the strategy and operations practice here at Fahrenheit. And I'm excited today to be with Chris Finn, one of my colleagues in the S&O practice who works with a lot of CIOs and COOs around sort of IT strategy and navigating the crazy world that is AI these days. So Chris, I wanted to ask you, you tend to get a little bit different types of calls than most of the folks at Fahrenheit, right? So when a CEO or a COO picks up the phone to call you these days, what's the conversation you're having with them most often?
Well, one of the more common conversations these days is AI. So every CEO seems to have FOMO about AI. They're not exactly sure what it is, how it could help them, how they should execute on it, but they're pretty sure they need to at least think about this and understand it. And so those calls, generally start out as I need to have an AI strategy, which is really maybe that's the end of the journey, not the beginning. And so the deeper, broader part of the conversation is, well, I've got, asking them what business problems do they have they want to solve, and so they can understand that. And then we have to map that against what business problems can AI solve. What's a good match for that versus other parts of technology adoption or other pieces and ways that we can help them. And so, kind of narrowing down that funnel, the last thing we typically then talk about, which is appropriate, is about architecture and technology, right? That should be the end of the string here, to understanding what kind of architecture, what pieces, what partners do they need to engage in order to really do things in a way that's appropriate for their industry maturity and model. What works for a Fortune 100 client isn't really going to work very well for a mid-market company that's focused on certain specific use cases.
Yeah. Um, Within AI, obviously, we're going through our own journey internally, right, with AI and trying to figure out the correct balance between productivity and enhanced analysis and all the benefits along with kind of the risk profile, right? And we deal with a lot of sensitive information. We got to make sure that we protect it. I think a lot of people get stuck on that, and there tends to either be over optimism, maybe, or just complete risk paralysis.
Yeah, so I think on the ends of the spectrum, some people discover Claude and they type in some prompts and they're so overwhelmed and overjoyed at the things they get, they don't realize that it can be stupendously wrong. So the important point is really you need to have expertise and knowledge about a subject in order to really effectively drive Claude. So it's a little bit like, you might have a Formula One race car, but if you're not a Formula One race car driver, you really need to think about how fast you want to go and how you want to do that. So I think that's one end. You've got to kind of rein in enthusiasm. On the other end, you have people who are very concerned about the privacy aspects and how that's going to work with their business. Or we do a lot of work with healthcare and healthcare services companies, and really that's a little bit more about compliance and security and just basically kind of applying the right principles and methodology to make sure that you're following appropriate guidance around personally identifiable information and other pieces that are really should be restricted. They're also just there are some very simple settings you can set in order to make sure that if your employees are using Claude or Grok or whatever, that they're not sharing information they shouldn't write off. But again, you need to have policies and supervision of that because it's out there on if you're any company today, you're really already seeing your employees engage in this and probably engaging in things that you really may not want them to do in a way that's unpredicted. So that's something that people need to think about on the other end.
Yeah. There's also, I've heard, and so a lot of conversations recently, I think you probably too have heard similar, that there's an element of kind of data readiness. And we're going, as I said, going through this ourselves. We just got the ability to connect Claude to our SharePoint. Well, that's wonderful. But there's a lot of stuff in there that may or may not add any value. We've had that same SharePoint for a long time.
Yeah, so there's a lot of mid-market companies are just now getting some maturation in how they're using the SaaS platforms. So whether they use Salesforce for their sales and go-to-market team, they're adopted NetSuite or some other ERP for their back office, and so they've created these islands of data. And they're generally not very well managed. They may have some reporting or Power BI or something on top where they're essentially trying to kind of report. They're putting data into various spots. None of it's very well governed or managed, and so the the step we have to go through with clients as they start to think about how do I leverage information is we really need to think about how do you get to a data platform? How do you integrate this data in a way that you really only have reliable and just the data you need as something that you use to run your business, right? So there's a step to go through there, and then be able to have it accessible to the right applications and pieces that are required to execute on these business processes.
Yeah. It's a same old story of kind of garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of respects. And you're right about I've been guilty myself of kind of being a little bit overly optimistic in certain instances, right? And I've used Claude extensively now in client work for things like doing market research or competitive analysis and those sorts of things. And we just used it on a project to do a pretty detailed bottoms up analysis of a market, huge Excel model that we built, and it built this model that looked absolutely exquisite. But once you start digging in, despite how many instructions you give it not to fabricate things, there are things in there where it'll sneak stuff, try to sneak stuff by it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen. I've just dealt with a lot of things where I've tried to create deliverables or even just methodologies. And again, it looks great on the surface, but it takes somebody who's fairly expert in a particular discipline in order to know what's wrong there. The other thing I would say is just sometimes it can be out of date. These large language models only get updated so frequently. So that might be operating on data that was 6 to 12 months old. And so you may, if you're doing more current market research, you might want to work with Perplexity, which is much better at more current deep research than some of the other LLM tools. So it does take education. And I would say, as we're getting back to kind of how we deliver things, we really have, I'll call it an expert-led advisory. And so we're experts now enabled by technology. And we'll be able to kind of adopt more and more of that as we go. But you do need to have the expert, kind of driving you need the Formula One driver driving the car where they get the best results.
Yeah, I totally agree. And both of our experiences, we came from, or at least spent sizable portions of our career in kind of traditional management consulting organizations. And in those environments, you generally have a team of very, very smart, but very inexperienced folks who are kind of learning on the job. And that would be a task I would have assigned to somebody like that in the past. And, Claude is not quite ready to replace that, but you still need that senior oversight and somebody who's
Sure. And I think that's
outside from sales.
expert-led delivery with the right technology enablement allows you to be a lot more efficient and effective and agile than those more traditional pyramid-based consulting organizations. We really just don't have junior people, right? We just have the senior people who are now able to operate and do things in a way that might be, I know personal experience. I'm able to do things, in half the time and less than half the time, just from a speed standpoint. With the appropriate tools, and so that creates a cost advantage for our clients as well as a speed advantage, and then agility. We can adjust things really quickly as we go through the process.
What do you think an organization? We talked a little bit about Fahrenheit and the kind of unique model that we have, where we have expert practitioners with deep experience in their fields and their functional areas, and we don't really have that traditional leverage model. What do you see as kind of the biggest advantage of that?
Well, so just to reiterate, I think one is our greatest strength is our people. And so we've got people who've got very deep senior consulting advisory experience, but they've also got C-level operating exec experience. And so, those people, you don't find them in larger consulting firms, people who kind of essentially just live within that within that framework. They've never had to eat their own cooking, which I think all people in our practice have had to eat their own cooking, which is very important. And so we've got that kind of that base of experience that's really really helpful. And then, as you said, the model is about expert-led delivery allows us to be much faster and ability to deliver things more quickly. We also can pivot. So, a good example is I was working with a client and we were primarily focused on value creation, but they felt like they had a certain areas where we had to go deeper into go-to-market and some of their operations in terms of their operating model. So I was able to do that, and we were able to move, turn the ship in order to add that piece, deliver on that piece of it as well as the kind of the initial remit, which is not something you can typically do with a kind of larger and less flexible consulting firm. So I think that flexibility and agility is really important.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks very much for taking a couple minutes to chat with us today.
All right. Thank you.